Hola, Paletitas. Since we recorded this episode, devastating fires have engulfed the LA area, a place that most of our team calls home. This is Joel.
And Eli Perez, producers of Las Paleteras podcast. Friends and colleagues have heartbreakingly lost their homes and belongings. While we share their collective grief, we've also been inspired by the collective organizing and compassion that our LA community has shown for one another. It's one of the many things that we love about our city.
This episode explores the concept of home, and what we've seen so far through these fires affirms that home is not just a place. Home is a feeling of connection and love.
This episode features art activist Johanna Toruño, creator of the Unapologetic Street Series. Enjoy the episode.
Las Paleteras.
Hola, hola, Paletitas. I'm Ana Sheila.
And I'm Jose Richard, alias La Algona, and welcome back to another episode of
Las Paleteras.
That's right. Y'all know y'all love us. Well, listen, today we have a very, very special guest, Johanna Toruño, and she is the founder of the Unapologetic Street Series. Yes.
Thank you so much for having me, y'all.
How are you doing, Johanna?
This is so cute. I'm feeling good, a new start, a clean slate. Capricorn season brought that to us as always. So
Cap season.
we
This is a
ended and we
Capricorn little
started.
Kiki right here.
Yeah.
Oh, yo. I
you
never
end the
thought
year
we
with
ended
us and
we
you started.
Absolutely.
Hey.
We're the gatekeepers of time.
Oh,
Listen.
a cardinal sign. Oh, no.
I mean, what else sign could, right?
Hello.
Not for nothing.
Yahweh.
Not picking any fights, but I'm just saying.
I'm always trying to fight. As a Capricorn, I feel like I'm always trying to fight every other sign.
I don't know. I feel like that's your Aries. I feel
Oh,
like
you got
that's
Aries? You got Aries too?
Aries rising.
Yo también. But you have it a little bit more activated. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm like Capricorn in the chair, but an Aries in the camera.
That's a virtue to have.
Oh, thank you.
Truly is.
For real.
Sometimes I have to deal with myself, but yeah.
Okay, Johanna. So, we're Las Paleteras, and something we like to start off with a little fun question. Ask all of our guests, if you were to be a paleta flavor, what would it be and why?
I thought about this. Okay, so I would love to be a paleta de mango verde con alguaste.
What?
Yeah,
Tell us
yeah,
about
I'm gonna
this.
tell you about it.
Okay, she really,
Okay,
y'all,
so-
this is how you know she's a Capricorn, y'all, because she did her homework. She's literally, I'm about to be on Las Paleteras. They're probably going to ask me this. She's
did.
ready, and she has a creative answer, like A+.
So mango over everything, always. But I specifically grew up with mango verde. I'm Salvadoran.
Okay.
And then alguaste is something that we put over mango and like other fruits and like anything. I think alguaste to us is what chamoy is to y'all, right?
Yeah.
So alguaste is ground up, very indigenous. Pepitas, pumpkin seeds, you grind it up and it's a beautiful green. So there's actually paletas in El Salvador of mango verde and alguaste. So I've had one and they were quite delightful.
I love
Or some
that.
charamuscas too.
Charamuscas, yes.
Es que ya en casita, ustedes no saben. I talk a lot about my Mexican side, but I'm also putaco, half pupusa, half taco. I'm also Salvadorian.
I do know that. Yes, I know.
We talked about that. Yeah.
Beautiful.
That's good. Well, listen, I want to hear a little bit more of like, ¿cómo has estado? Y for our listeners, cuéntales un poquito más about like what you do, your craft, your art, in Unapologetic Street Series.
Yeah, the Unapologetic Street Series is my baby. It's something that started out of a need to find community. I always say that I think so many of us live such shared experiences, but sometimes in isolated ways, right? So for me, growing up, coming to the United States when I was like 10 years old, but to a southern state, like my family was in California, but my mom was the only one that went to Virginia. I had a very, what I would say, isolating experience as a migrant kid, because I was probably one of the few in my town. So I think for me, as I got older, I knew that I just wanted to share experiences with folks, and something that I took with me from El Salvador was public art.
Yeah.
So putting your feelings out in the open, sharing your feelings with folks on the street, became an artistic expression that I wouldn't have had I had not that experience of being an immigrant kid.
Yeah.
So it became my baby in the way that I communicate and connect with folks. I think that public spaces are sacred spaces, and I think that we share them if we're outside with each other. There's so many ads. My work started in New York City, so there's like a bombardment of ads, and I just wanted art that took up the same unapologetic space as the ad industry did, but centered messages of liberation and messages of community instead of trying to sell you Eurocentric beauty like lifestyle or lifestyles that are unattainable and unsustainable to all of us.
Yeah, I love that. Oye, una pregunta, and I love the work that you do, and we're following you for years. How are you feeling now, as we starting this new year, this new administration? How are you feeling about your work right now and your approach to it? Yeah, what are some thoughts that you have as you think about how you want to use public space, how you want to use your art and your voice? How has that shifted, or how is that shifting?
Yeah, I think, honestly, I wouldn't say it has shifted very much at all, because the message has kind of stayed the same no matter who's been in office in the past 8 years, because I've been doing this for 7 years. But for me, I started this work right in the beginning of the last Trump administration.
Yeah.
Like I said, I wanted to create community. I wanted to find community. So I think it's just a continuation with maybe like a more like accented feeling of the repetition of how we can repeat history. But I don't think that's a new concept. I think that we've been living in a society with pillars of things that are just not for us. I think this whole nation has been built in that way. So I think my work continues, maybe in different ways of expression and some things that I'll bring back to the forefront. But we continue, and I don't think that there's a massive change because we have not had the revolution that we so beautifully deserve.
100%.
So I think that's how I'm feeling about it these days.
And it seems sometimes like we get close to it, or we toy with the idea of this revolution. But I don't know if we've reached that place or have really felt the urgency as a country. And I only say this as someone who lives in a different country now and understands a whole different gambit of societal problems. Como que todavía no hemos encontrado esa urgencia to take it from like a performative organizing to like in las calles on the streets.
Right.
And I'm still like, what do we need as a society to really make that paradigm shift?
Yeah. That's a good question and thought. I think overall there's so many people that are so mobilized and empowered and ready to do so. And I think that we have a lot of systems and people in place who absolutely don't benefit from us, having a complete change of status quo and a complete change of life. So I think that until pillars are brought down, we have to continue that fight, the establishment.
Y'all know me. I'm always trying to burn some shit down. So I love Johanna already.
That's the Aries
For
rising.
real.
Throw it out.
Y'all, so what I wanted to talk about in this episode today is something that I think we can all resonate with as immigrants, as first gen folks, is the concept of home and how we've had to sort of maybe had different relationships, evolving relationships with it. And I know you're living in Mexico. I'm from Mexico, and I moved there for a few years. So I think that that's probably impacted how we think about home. So that's what I wanted to talk about, because I think we probably all have just very beautiful connections to that concept. So I want to open it up by asking this first question. If y'all remember the first time that you really felt at home, or if you remember your first home and how you might describe that, giving it a little bit of color and whoever wants to kick it off.
Pinche Ana Sheila me quiso hacer llorar este episodio.
I'm good at that.
I know. It's always, you're not gonna lie, in all of our episodes like this season, Ana Sheila's the one that makes me cry. Like I've cried maybe twice or three times. A couple of times on the podcast, and it's always Ana Sheila. But yeah, I'm curious to hear from you first.
Okay. I would say, I think for me, when I think of home, I think of Christmases at my aunt's house. My family has been very dysfunctional in a lot of ways. I think that a lot of us have shared so many experiences around just family that maybe doesn't talk to each other, or family that's over here. But for whatever reason, during the holidays and Christmas, we always gathered at my tia's house in El Salvador. And I so very vividly remember the windows and the way that they opened up into her garden. And so I think for me, it's always Christmas time and having family over. And I got to live that until I was like almost 9 years old, because then I came to the United States when I was like 10. So I will always remember those Christmas memories in my tia's house very fondly, with like panes con pollo, you know, like that smell takes me right back to like being 9 years old. Rábanos con pepinos and the sandwich, you know. Immediate home,
Yeah.
like right away.
I love that.
You know, as you're saying that, it's funny because I guess some of the things I'm sure I'm going to process throughout this episode. Home is not in a casa.
Right.
And I think it's a reflection to what you said. It's been such an unstable thing for me.
Yeah.
And funny enough, I think it's why I became an urban planner, now that I think about it. But when you ask the question of like home, I think the first thing that came to mind and the first memory was riding the bus with my mom. And I just remember that I always wanted to be on the inside of the seat, the double seats, and I wanted to be on the inside by the window. And of course, I mean, I was very young because I remember standing on the seat, and I was like, I don't think I was standing on the seat as a 30-year-old.
Right.
So, I mean, maybe, but that's a whole different home, right? But I just remember like standing and being fascinated by the city, and being super like watching the stores or watching everything and being like, why does this place look like this and this place look like that? And I remember that's been a sentiment that's always been throughout my life. Of course, it then kind of morphed into like, the city of LA is so big, so you're never going to run into the same people twice. And to me, that was an adventure. And so it was a reason why I wanted to leave my house, because I was like, what new adventure awaits me? And so I think of like home, it's not necessarily, and again, I think these are all just manifestations for my own traumas, but it's not family. It's not in a home, in a house. Like my idea of home is this entire city. I love my city.
Yeah.
And
Wow. You know, that's so interesting because, you know, I had this question. I was so curious what y'all were going to say. And I hadn't really thought I'm like, what is it for me?
Yeah.
And I hadn't really thought about it. And I thought like, oh yeah, it's going to be in a place too. And then right now, as I was like reflecting, what really came up, it was also not in a home. And I think to me, home is really when you feel most at home in yourself. And I think I was thinking about when have I felt that? Like when I'm not thinking about what I have to do like next, or like when I can feel really, really present. And the moments I've felt most at home, I think has been with my family, but we haven't been at home. We've been on vacation, like traveling in Mexico. So my dad passed away, unfortunately, a few years ago, but that's when I think about home, when I felt like home. It's the four of us being out somewhere in Mexico, exploring together is when I felt like home. And I felt like we were just enjoying each other. Y también había, pues, you know, peleas y eso, but like we really felt so connected. And when I think about the most beautiful memories I've had, it's been con mi familia in Mexico, exploring together, sharing together, eating together, when I'm not thinking about anything else, but just like enjoying their presence and the place that I'm from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's interesting to think about. I caught myself this trip particularly. So I think folks know that I've been living in Mexico for a year. And what folks don't know is that I'm staying one more year. But I think it has to do with all those different things. I found myself this trip being like, oh, back home.
Yeah.
And realizing that it was Mexico that I was referring to. But then I also said, well, but I'm home because this is also my home. And like the thing about LA is that for me, LA will never be a city. Like these buildings to me are my childhood memory. These streets are my best friends. Like there's nowhere in this city that I can't be and not know how to get home. Like I know this city so good inside and out. And she's also seen my good, my bad, and my ugly. And she's loved me at my ugly, which is I think something that truly is home and love. And it's interesting because what I don't think I've shared this before. I mean, I think you know Ana Sheila, but I don't think I've shared it so openly. But what folks don't know is that the reason I left is because I got evicted from where I was living. And it was a very quick eviction, and it had to do with gentrification. And it was like I only had like 30 days to find something. And it was like, well, girl, I don't got generational wealth. And, that's going to cost a couple $1,000s to like find something. And in my own anxiety and insecurity of what the hell was going to happen, I was like, I can't afford LA, but I can afford Mexico. And I had already toyed with the idea of moving. So I decided to do it. And I always say, like, I will never forget the pain of being displaced of my hometown. Like and I get it. I'm also like an urban planner, so I study this, or I'm in relationship to these issues in a professional way, in a systematic way. But to experience it is also very, very hurtful. And so I think that's part of the reason probably why I'm staying in Mexico is because I feel like I'm still mad at LA, and I'm like, we need to take a break right quick, girl. But I think also what it was is I feel like I've been surviving for such a long time that for the first time, I'm giving myself the opportunity to just live and not feel like I have to survive, and that's okay. And now Mexico is becoming home. I had a situation, I think you would appreciate this, only because of our shared Salvadoran identity. But I was in Portland, Maine, and I went to a pupuseria because I was like, yo, there's no pupusas in Mexico. Like, I still haven't found them, and I crave pupusas. Like, that's the part of who I am, Of
course.
And so I went to a pupuseria, and I'm there, and estoy ordenando en español, y el chavo que estaba ahí, el cajero, me dice, ¿verdad que tú eres de la Ciudad de México? Y yo, ¿por qué? Y me dice, es que tienes el acento bien chilango. Yo soy de Michoacán. And I was like, soy de Los Ángeles, pero sí vivo en México. And there was this moment of like, sort of like belonging that like I was recognized as chilango. And then there's another part of me, right? I was like, I made it. But then there's another part of me that's like also craving this relationship that I have with El Salvador, because even though, and that's complicated, but we don't have to get into that now. But it was such a beautiful thing where I feel like right now I'm astral projecting between many homes, right? Like it's easy to come to LA. And I think to your point, it's interesting that we all have like places or moments that are home and not like an infrastructure, because we can, through all those different things.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, speaking of LA, I feel like this might be a great time for us to do our...
¿Sabías qué?
Yes.
Amigas, regresamos to our favorite segment of the podcast que se llama ¿Sabías qué? So, Johanna, just to give you some context, what we do during ¿Sabías qué? We just drop a couple little facts here and there that are related to the topic. And so today's ¿Sabías qué? Is inspired a little bit about urban planning and the place that we're in. One of my biggest pet peeves is when people always say that LA is like a new city, that it's the laboratory of tomorrow. And it's like, no, perras. LA is an old city. It used to be Mexico. It used to be Spain. It used to be California. And it continues to be Chumash territory. So LA is not a new city. In fact, the ¿Sabías qué? For today is the original name of Los Angeles when it was founded by the 12 families from Mexico, porque eran 12 familias. Sepulveda is not a street, girl. It's a street, but it's also one of those families. Los Sepulvedas and Pio Pico was out here. So, like, let's talk about that. But el nombre original de Los Ángeles es el pueblo de Nuestra Señora, la Reina de Los Ángeles del Río de Puríncula. The LA River, its indigenous name is el Río de Puríncula. So, now you know. You may be a no sabo kid, pero yo sí sé. And that's ¿Sabías qué? Did you ever hear, or I'm curious to hear, just to kind of like riff off the ¿Sabías qué? For a little bit. And also for you, Ana Sheila, what are some like first impressions that you had of LA? Maybe like not necessarily being from here, but then you got here and lived here and you're like, oh yeah, bitches had it wrong. You know what I mean? 'Cause I feel like a lot of people have like prejudices about LA that are not real once you get to know people from the city or you get to be in community with the city. So I'm curious to hear, what are some like prejudices that you were like, oh, no, that's not what people really do.
You know what? I feel like I didn't like have that many like prejudice because like I feel like from a young age I was in Southern California and I wasn't living in LA, but I was coming to LA often.
Right.
So I feel like I didn't have the usual prejudice that like everybody's pretentious or like todo esto, and so I feel like I didn't have those. I'm trying. I'll think this year.
So maybe let me reframe it for you because you have a different relationship to LA. But I wonder what is something that you deepened about the city that you maybe didn't get to experience before as someone who just visited.
Yeah, I mean, I think just like the level of community building that there is in LA that I didn't feel like I lived in Riverside, like for middle school and high school. And maybe I just, was young and didn't get to really get to know the community organizers in Riverside, when I left. But I think just the level of community organizing and community building that is happening in LA, that's been really beautiful. Just seeing the amount of talent across so many different areas and industries in Los Angeles that I think is really beautiful. That we get access to just people creating so many beautiful things. And I think that I feel very grateful and blessed for that because I think there aren't that many places where you have that kind of talent in so many different forms and modalities, right? I think that's really special. And I feel like it's so inspiring and it helps me grow as a person.
I love that.
Yeah.
I was also really young the first time I came to LA. I was 17. But I had the knowledge that my mom's family was here. So like, I also don't think I really experienced those things that people want to believe so badly about Los Angeles because to me, LA always felt like the promised land of my family, like where my family was, but I wasn't because my mom, like we were extracted to Virginia, right? So like, I knew that my mom had brothers here and that when my mom first came to the United States, she came to California because she had an aunt here. So I think for me, California has always been, and specifically Los Angeles has been that place where my family has been there before me. And in this migration story for myself, they were there and I wanted to be here because I always felt like LA was more familiar to home than obviously Virginia was. And we're talking about cow fields across my high school, Virginia, right? So, of course, Los Angeles was going to feel like home. 100%. So I never really experienced those. But of course, now, I'll go on threads and people are talking about, oh, people are so fake. People are this, and then I'm like, y'all just don't spend time with people.
Right.
Y'all are trying to extract something from the city and only dealing with people who are extractors themselves.
100%.
So that's why you're having a bad experience, honey. Like you're
like you weren't invited to the kickback, girl.
Right. Like
right.
You don't know people, you don't know gente, you don't know community, you don't know the name of your street's paletero, you probably don't even have one. Like so I don't know where you're at, but that's not the experience I've ever had with the city.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I love that. That warms my heart.
Jonas, I mean, I know you were undocumented until recently, so I'm curious, what was it like, the longer that you were here without, being able to go back, for what felt like what was home before? How did that sort of change your relationship with the space, with El Salvador, with the space you were living in? Just any reflections on kind of how that evolved the longer that you were here and the distance grew between you and your home country?
Yeah. I was undocumented for such a long time. I was almost 10 years old when I came. I came when I was 9 in November and I turned 10 in December. So not going back to El Salvador from like 10 years old until I was 33. It's a long time, right? So I think for me, for such a long time, I would have these vivid dreams like my whole life from like the time I came to the US until I went back to El Salvador to a year and a half ago. Concept of time is so crazy to me. So I'm like, oh, it was... But I always had these dreams where I was going back home. And in my dream, I would have this panic, though, that I wasn't supposed to go back home because then I wouldn't be able to go back to what is now home to me, right? So I was like, in my dream, I was having like immigration trauma where I was like, no, I can't leave because then I can't come back. So I always felt very torn away from my family, torn away from everything that I knew. But I always very vividly just wanted to go back, and in my dreams and in my mind at all times. And I think that so many of us shared that. When I was definitely old enough when I came to the United States to remember home and to know that this is not where I was from. I came in the winter, so it was like snowing in Virginia.
Yeah.
And I did not romanticize snow whatsoever. I was horrified by it. I was like crying, telling my mom it was so cold. I was freezing. You know, I'm from it's hot all the time.
Yeah, it's basically
and then if
kind
it's
of
not hot, it's like raining, but it's still hot.
But it's still hot, yeah.
So I think for me, that time where I was not able to go back home was a time that I filled with yearning to go home. So there was never a time where I disassociated or tried to assimilate. It was the opposite. If anything, I did everything in my power to stay close to my culture, even in a place such as Virginia, where at the time there's probably I can't even think of another Salvadoran in my high school.
Wow.
Or my town, to be honest. At the time,
how did you stay close?
Well, I think migrant folks always find a way to stay close to each other. So my mom found this lady in an apartment building close to her office in Richmond who made panes con pollo, pan con chumpe, in her apartment. But you had to know somebody who knew that lady to even find that connection, right? Or before they started making pupusas, before there was a little Latino market that sold primarily Mexican food, then they started making pupusas. So I think that you always find a way, migrant folks, we find a way to keep those things closely. But I think it also kind of helped that, my mom and I were both immigrants. It wasn't that, my mom came and then I was born, and my mom could almost have that degree of separation. I think we were both feeling it together. And of course, my mom being older when she came, she missed her country, and
For sure.
our culture was different. So I think we both kind of found a way.
Yeah.
It's like finding the panes at the señora in the apartment, or,
Yeah.
talking to our tia, trying to find a way while being undocumented. I think that we're pretty gifted at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned immigration trauma, because it never leaves, even if status changes,
Yeah.
right? But it never leaves. My mom, I think very, very similar to what you're sharing. So I'm a child of immigrants. I was born in the US. And my mom hadn't been back to Mexico in, I think, about 34 years. And she finally, we figured it out, and she got the opportunity to go, and she has a residency. And so technically she's able to come in and out of the country. And when I traveled with her, when we had to come back through immigration, they do the whole line, U.S. citizens versus
Right,
no
yes.
citizens. And she has her Mexican passport. And she was like, oh, I think I have to go here. No. You're coming with me. You're my mother. I dare them. And so then we went through together, and then she had to go through a second interview. When I tell you that I got hella triggered, but I almost became like an enemy of the state in 5 seconds, because I was like, where are you taking her? I need your manager's name. Show me your badge. I'm going to wait for her right here. You can go and get the badge. I'm waiting for my mother right here. And it was just this growing up memory of deportation being a hella real thing, and continuing to be a real thing, especially under this new administration. Me la pelas, hijo tu puta madre. But you can leave that one, I was told. But
Leave it in.
that trauma, and to feel it again at 33, even when
Yeah.
you're I'm older, I can advocate for her. She can also advocate for herself, and she's whatever that means. But in that moment, and they literally were like, we're about to call security. I dare you. And my mom was like, girl, it took 5 minutes, and homegirl in the back was also Mexican, and she was so nice. And I was like, okay, cool. But I was ready to burn down the airport.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's that immigration trauma that always continues to be and percolate in our bodies, And now I'm an immigrant in Mexico, but that's another story.
That's another story, which maybe we'll get into in a little bit. But I'm curious, what did it feel like when you first arrived back in El Salvador? What was the first place you went to? What were if you can describe
I'm about to cry.
the feelings, what
never
surprised you?
Yeah. Damn. Okay.
I'm like, we're all gonna cry.
Vamos a llorar. Vamos a llorar.
This is a safe space. Queremos llorar.
So
Capricorn's crying is not like it's a rare sight. Like we
I'm a
don't.
Cancer
I don't know, I
moon, so
cry
I'm a
all
Cancer
the
moon. Entonces
time.
para mí es
yeah,
como...
I cry all the time. Anything, a commercial. So I was flying. We're on the plane. My partner's with me, and it was a evening flight. So then we're flying over like Mexico, and like I can see little lights, and I'm like, okay, cute. We're flying over Mexico. Then I'm starting to get emo because I'm listening to emo music, of course. And then I know that we're about to land because I can start seeing like land closer and the lights. And I remember like I started crying as soon as they said, "Bienvenidos al Salvador."
Oh my goodness.
And I was like, oh, crying, sobbing, but also trying to like keep my shit together because I almost felt kind of desensitized a tiny bit because you spend such a long time wanting something.
Yeah.
So when it happens, you don't know what to do with yourself, right? So I got off the plane and I'm like, oh wow, this airport, it is so fancy. Like what is going on here? And it's like, welcome to El Salvador. So when we got there, my aunts wanted to come pick us up, but I knew I needed like a day for myself because I didn't want to see them right away. I think part of it was not seeing them for such a long time since I was 10 years old. And here I am returning as like a 33-year-old woman, So I think I needed that like good 12 hours of just being alone. But we took a Uber to San Salvador and we spent the night in a hotel. And right outside of our hotel window, you could just see a volcano so beautiful, just the outline of the volcano. And it was like nighttime, so you're seeing the lights of people's homes and you're seeing the lights of the city just so beautifully reflect off of this like gorgeous stunning volcano. And I couldn't sleep that night. I couldn't sleep because I couldn't believe that I was there. Because for such a long time, you have this like idea of what going home is going to look like. But when you do, there's no words to describe that out of body feeling. Because I knew that I was returning for myself as a grown adult, but I was also returning as my 10-year-old who left, as my 16-year-old who wished I'd have been there for my, my 16th, my 15th, and then the young adult who wished I had family to lean on when you're in your 20s and you don't know what the hell is going on. So I was returning as so many different versions of myself. And I think that took so much out of me that I needed to be alone for that first day that I was there. And then seeing my family was such an out-of-body experience because it felt like as if nothing had happened, as if I had just seen them last week. Wow. That transition to seeing my tias was so seamless that I was just so happy for like the whole 2 weeks that I was there. And everything was revisiting different parts of me.
What were a few places that you visited?
One of the first places I went to by myself without anybody, my fiance went with me, was my school when I was a little girl.
No
Because for some reason, that is one of the most visited places in my dreams was being in school. I think it's because I was kind of a badass kid, but I enjoyed being in school. So I wanted to go back so badly. And so when I got there, Uber drops us off. And I'm just like, they have this like huge portón. So you have to like, somebody has to let you in. Like they're not just like letting people in. And I was like, hello, I was a student here like 30 years ago. And she was like, okay. And I was like, can I come in? Let me in. And she went and asked somebody if I could come in, and they let me into the school and they opened the portón. And when you're a little girl, that portón looks so massive. It looks like, but then there I was standing and it looked the same, but so much of it had changed, of course. The layout was the same, but it didn't look the way that I remembered it. But I will be forever so glad that was the first place I went to, because it was the most visited place in my dreams, was that school. Yeah,
That's wild.
That's so beautiful.
it was. And then they gave me a little tour. It was so cute.
That's so cute.
I love it.
Yeah. So that was the first place.
Yeah.
And then I spent my entire trip visiting as many places that I could fit.
You could
from
that you
those
had been
different-
places that you had been to.
Yeah.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah.
What was your favorite meal
Oh,
that you had?
Oh, yeah.
my tia's cooking for sure.
Yum.
Yeah.
What'd she make? I'm sorry.
What did she not make? We had tamales, sopa de pollo. I love sopa de pollo. That's like one of my
Sí.
panes con pollo, like
But like, the
home,
sopita
home,
también.
home.
Like,
Oh, like sopita. De gallina india specifically. But other than that, it was breakfast every morning. Breakfast was my favorite part.
Huevos picados.
Frijoles, a little tortilla, queso patacones.
Yeah.
Bro, you sabes. Y'all gotta start charging $15 for that shit over here because that's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, every meal was so sacred because food is such an important aspect of my life in general. But to return, to be able to go back home and to find those women still there, right? My tias. And to find them, thank God, in good health and able to make me breakfast. I was just so grateful for those moments with them every morning. My tia reading El Diario de Hoy.
Just those like everyday things.
Just every day,
with
like
the-
as if I had never left. Like as if I had not left, this would have been my normal.
Yeah, your day to day.
That's so beautiful because I feel like, of course, things have changed, but it was. I feel so. It feels so beautiful to hear that there were things that, in some way, didn't feel like they hadn't, and how that might have helped you feel even more welcome and connected to the space in your family as you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those were the little moments for
And
sure.
there's something about sharing meals that just can feel so much like home.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
I have such a visceral reaction to you sharing because I feel like I'm vicariously living through you. I've never been to El Salvador. And a lot of it has to do with, machismo exists in Latin America regardless of country.
Yeah.
And because my mom married into a Salvadorian family, my dad's Salvadorian, like I grew up Salvadorian, you know what I mean? Like I do not know the Mexican national anthem, but the moment las trompetas empiezan, I know that's a Salvadorian one, you know? Like I grew up watching Hola, El Salvador. Like that's my jam. And the food was all Salvadorian. My accent growing up was Salvadorian accent. And I don't have a good relationship with my biological father is also from El Salvador. I don't have a relationship with that side of the family. My stepdad is from El Salvador, and I don't have any family that I would go visit in El Salvador. So it feels like there's this, like you said like the whole welcome to El Salvador, and I was like, will I ever get to experience that if I have no relationship to it in the way that I do? And I remember I had to write a poem once about this because it was so emotional. It's called Torogos, which is the national bird of El Salvador. And I said, aunque nunca conozca sus bosques, siempre conoceré el verde del berro, el olor del queso a escurrirse de las pupusas. And it's been like this, especially now that I'm in Mexico, because I feel so connected, because it's honoring my mom.
Right.
And she deserves to be honored. But then as you're sharing this, I'm just kind of like, like I've lost my Salvi accent, you know, as I'm happy I am that people call me Chilango. I'm like, but did I lose a part of myself? And it's kind of hard to like, not justify, but to tell people like, no, I grew up Salvi. Like, I know what you're talking about, you know? And so as you're sharing, it triggered something in me. I felt like, I'm like, will El Salvador ever become home in the way that all these other places have? So thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
Maybe one day I'll get my welcome to El Salvador. El pulgarcito de América.
Well, and I want to get into us sharing a little bit about what our sort of experience going to Mexico has been like. But I did want to ask one last question. Like, coming back from that first trip, is there anything that you felt like that you took back with you, that brought back with you?
I wasn't the same person
Yeah.
when I came back.
Yeah, just that's what I was. Yeah, I know it's just
Yeah,
one trip, but
100%.
it's a really, it's a big trip.
Yeah, and I say that all the time. I'm like, the person that left to go to El Salvador is not who came back. So I think that's the biggest thing that I could have brought back with me,
Yes.
because that's something that I longed for so long. And those pieces of me that I could put back together, I could only find there. So I'm forever grateful to not be the same person who left.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
I'm having a whole emotional breakdown.
What have been some of the things or that you've learned, some reflections that you've had, now living in Mexico for a year? And how did it feel like a return to you? I know it's a different kind of relationship.
I'm having an emotional breakdown because it's literally been a year. And I was going to stay for a year. And then I remember crying to my friend Nacho. Yo y Nacho lloramos por todo. And I was kind of like, I don't want to go. I'm just starting to build community.
Yeah.
I'm learning so much of the things that I need to deconstruct of myself. The world is really fucked up. Yeah. And when you live outside of a US bubble, I think I've been more empathetic to a lot of different experiences, to understanding the privilege in which I navigate. I mean, I work from home, so my day is in English. But I tried to live so much of my other day outside of work in Spanish, and that's been beautiful. I've also seen that there's a lot of money in Mexico City. Yeah. There are a lot of people that I know that I've met who don't have the need to migrate. So I think it's made me more critical and more empathetic to my mom's experience, which forced her to migrate. Yeah. I get to spend more time with my grandmother. She's my last living grandparent. So I have like 5 hours of stories recorded from her. I get to spend time with my mom's side of the family. Again, like a lot of my mom's side of the family moved to Indiana. And my mom was like the only one. And so my stepdad's family was the only family we knew, and they weren't the best for me or to me. And so this period is so emotional for me. And so to my uncles on my mom's side call me Richie. And that's a nickname that no one else calls me. And so it's beautiful to know that to them I'm Richie, But Mexico, I know, es un desmadre. It's just, I think in the beginning to be able to feel so connected and so related to it, because I can see myself in the people. It's something that you mentioned that also made me really, really cry. You mentioned the volcano. And from my rooftop, I can see El Popocatépetl and El Iztahuatépetl, and it's the isla. I don't know how to say her name. Oh, they're going to come for me. But to have volcanoes in the horizon is something I've never experienced. And so that's been so beautiful. And the last thing I'll say, I'm going to just say it in Spanish into the camera because I have to say thank you. A la gente que me ha cuidado en México, a la gente que me ha querido, que me ha abierto las puertas, que me dicen, alguna hermana, ya eres mexicana. Muchas gracias. Tengo muchos amiguitos allá en México, más que nada en esa. Aquí me hacen burla, pero el cachorrito también que me ha cuidado, que me han querido y que me han abierto las manos. Y gracias. The last thing I'll say, he cambiado. Yeah. I'm changing. I'm a different person since being in Mexico, and I love this person. Yeah. Soy más culero. I'm always trying to fight somebody. Y tengo un humor muy negro, but that's Mexico. O sea, like, that's the vibe. And so, yeah. And I'm sure I have more to say, but I think that's good. Ya lloré. Yeah. And you, I mean, the beautiful thing I think about us en Las Paleteras, it's so randomly, también a nuestra paletita César, que no está aquí con nosotras hoy, pero está allá atrás. We all have a deep relationship with Mexico, and it's so different. And Ana Sheila and I kind of overlap, and so I can only imagine, también for you. And I know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm resonating with so much of what you're sharing that you've learned and what Mexico has meant to you, because it meant so much to me when I was living there. So I moved there. I'm from Mexico City. I moved when I was 5. And so I spent my whole life first in Chicago and then in California. So always had a very close connection to Mexico. So I had always wanted to move back porque, also immigrated with my family. So similar to you, I just we were doing this journey together, right? Looking for community together. And there is something about that type of journey that you do when you do that with your parents, ¿verdad? So I always felt very close, and I know I wanted a deeper connection con Mexico. And so I moved in 2021 and was there for 2 years. And yeah, so many beautiful things. I think I resonate with the being able to connect with our family in a deeper way. Because before I, would go every few years, ¿verdad? Entonces my family in Mexico, they were like family, but they were like strangers, right? So I never, they didn't know about me really. Like I didn't talk about being queer or anything like that. And so to actually, for my family to really become my family, that's one of the most beautiful things that I took from being in Mexico. I think another thing I really took from my time there is I felt like I unlocked something that had been like dormant for a really long time. Like not being able to, Spanish being something I spoke my whole life with my family, but you still just growing up here, you definitely lose, you can't speak it in the same way, right? So being there for 2 years, I think I got to a level of Spanish where I could speak very fluidly, and I was not only expressing myself more fully, but I felt like I was expressing a personality that I hadn't been able to express. So I felt like I unlocked a whole nother fuller version of myself I hadn't been connected to in a long time, because I always say Spanish is the language of my heart. And so imagine not being able to really connect with your heart in such a full way until like I actually was able to really express myself the way I hadn't been able to in for a really long time.
Yo siempre digo que se me despegó la lengua.
Yeah. Yeah, and I kind of feel like I feel a little bit jealous of you right now, Nalgona, because something that I've noticed is that it did unlock something that I loved, like a fuller version of myself that I loved even more. And so when I moved back here, I started, using a lot of Spanish, so I could stay more connected to that. But then the longer you stay here, you kind of start to you have to stay committed to keeping that really present with you, that full version of yourself present, or you start to kind of lose it a little bit. And I've noticed, I think that my mental health when I was in Mexico, I think was the best that I had it in a long time. So I feel like whenever I've been here too long, siento que me empiezo a apagar poquito. And I'm like, I need to go back. And something about being back in Mexico, just even freaking moving through the streets, the way people take up space, the way people just move on the streets just feels so much more like home to me than the way and I love so many things about LA, but I think one of the things we don't have here is you're not always walking, we can't walk on the streets and feel community, right? And in Mexico City, you walk on the streets and I feel so full of everything that is going on, and it it fills my spirit in a way that I don't feel here. So I've noticed that the longer that I'm here, I've been back for almost 2 years now, and the longer that I'm here, the more that I kind of lose that little kind of spark that I was starting to feel so strongly in Mexico. Some of the things you said, like being more culero, I felt like I was more my dad was always me vale, right? And that was my dad. And I always really admired that about him. And I never could do that. And the longer I was in Mexico, the more I was like, oh yeah, I could, that kind of shit. And I feel like the longer I'm here, the less I feel connected to some of that energy. So it's just kind of reminding me of the special, things that Mexico brought out in me that do feel like a fuller version of myself. And it's sad that they can't always access that here, ¿verdad?
Yeah. I'm excited for you, Johanna. When are you planning to go back to El Salvador?
Hopefully February.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, I've gone this will be my 4th time in a year and a half.
Yeah.
Because now it's
100%.
Yeah. Once you open that door.
Once you open that door.
Yeah. The reason I ask is because I'm excited. I feel what's bringing us all together, I think, as people who are transnational, who are borderless, right? Nos pusieron fronteras, but really who we are as people is borderless. For you to experience El Salvador as the second home away from home, right? I always had the opportunity to go to Mexico City. I never went until I was 30.
Right.
And so, but I'm excited for you to build that and to come home and to be fuck LA for a little bit. Porque también porque pues sí, güey, es que cuando estás comprometida,
uno tiene que salir.
Justo, cuando te cases con esta ciudad también como cualquier matrimonio trae justo.
But I'm going to tell you a little secret, and not a lot of people know this.
Okay.
But my mom was actually born in Mexico City.
Shut the fuck up. Oh, shit.
So my grandparents were in Mexico at the time living.
Yeah.
So my mom was born in Mexico City, and they grew up for a little bit before they went back to El Salvador. So I've actually been having a huge itch recently where I'm like, I want to go to Mexico City.
Yeah.
And you haven't been yet?
No.
Okay.
Because I'm like, I know that my mom's Salvadoran, you know, but she was born there. So there's something in my mind where I'm like, my mom was born here.
Right. Aquí dio su primer grito.
That's right. That is absolutely right. And she's always like bugging me to get my Mexican citizenship.
Really?
So,
Oh my God.
Yeah, because that's what she's got. She's got her Mexican passport and stuff like that.
Really?
Yeah, she had to then later become a Salvadoran.
Can we get 3?
Can you get 3?
I can't. I don't think so.
Oh.
But
I
if
was like, I'd be down to get the Salvadorian one too.
listen,
Because I'm trying to get,
stack up those passports.
Todo lo que no sea US. I know. Pero so another thing that does come up in Mexico, I have a lot of this critique of the US, and it's totally valid as someone who grew up here and was raised here, all those different things. And I still have friends who remind me in Mexico, like, we love how you are so anti-US. Just remember que hay mucha gente que diera lo que fuera por tener tu pasaporte.
Yeah.
And that's always the lesson that I have to unpack and to unlearn. And I mean, I know folks of all kind of socioeconomic statuses in Mexico, and because I live in Nesa, which is more the state of Mexico, it's a little bit more hood. And so I have more people I know more people who grew up working class, and I think it's been an interesting and beautiful experience of like no longer I don't think I victimized my experience for a long time, but we're also get trained to like trauma dump shit. You know what I mean? And so to be in a place where now I'm the one with privilege has to be a lot of unpacking. So I don't victimize my experience anymore, but rather consider the US a tool. And yes, a privilege and a tool. And I think so what I was sharing with the producer and some folks, it's like I'm about to cap season. I probably turned 34 already by the time this episode aired, but who knows? But 34 is coming up, and I kept saying like I've never imagined my life. I never imagined I'd make it to 30. Just like the hood and all the things that, Sheila was there when I mentioned this earlier. And so now what I'm trying to do is reframe it and be like, okay, if you never saw yourself at 30, but you're now going to be 34, like you're here. Similar to what you said earlier, right? Like, it's what do you do when you arrive? And so now I'm trying to reframe it and be like, you know what? Fuck it. This is a second chance of life. If I've never imagined my life after 30, then let me reimagine it now. And so that's kind of part of the lesson that Mexico has also taught me. I mean, because I have the privilege to think about that. We've been talking about some of the goals.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I just want to share one. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's because you don't know, girl, but this podcast has changed all the hosts. Like, some of us are going to financial advising. Some of us are going to therapy. Some of us are now have booze. Like, we've been changing on this podcast in real time.
I mean, that's how you know we're doing a good thing.
What's up?
That's exactly right. Also, I know you're doing something.
Yeah, no, my last reflection, I think, that Mexico gave me too, is that I actually, I love myself more, because I think I used to, and I think, a lot of us, like back in the day, used to feel like, that, we've outgrown this, or it's a little bit like, like we felt that when I felt that when I was growing up, and like wanting to be more Mexican when I was in Mexico or whatever, and like wanting to fit in the US, whatever. But I think living in Mexico, what was really beautiful about that experience is that I actually felt much more connected to Mexico than I had been before. And I really appreciated feeling closer to Mexicans in Mexico and where I'm from and all those things. But also recognizing I was never going to be, my lived experience was never going to be someone that grew up in Mexico their whole life, and not wanting to try to be that, And at first when I first got there, I wanted people to like think like, oh, I want them to think that like, like I played this game, like how long I can go before they realize like I'm not from here. And, at first it was a little bit shorter, and then it kept getting longer. And that felt beautiful, because it felt like I was immersing myself in where I was, and I really like to do that wherever I live, period, regardless of whether I'm from there or not. But it was beautiful to feel more connected to the place I was living in and my roots, but also let go of this idea that I was ever going to be like them, and then really just appreciate exactly who I was and what I was bringing to the space, but loving myself and that experience, that bicultural experience, and what beautiful like perspective that's giving me, and that being loving myself exactly as I was, and also still appreciating a very closer connection to the place that I'm from at the same time. Yeah.
I love that. Ay, no,
Qué bonita la
me hicieron
conversación.
llorar, no mames. Oh, me hicieron llorar otra vez. We're coming to the end of the episode, se nos fue bien rápido. But I'm curious to hear from all of you. Maybe your definition of home has changed from the initial reflection, and maybe it hasn't not. But I'm curious to think about, in a quick sentence, is home and where is it living in now? Whether in your body, out of your body, in space, home now.
I think home now for me is wherever I can lay with my fiance and my dogs and just be cozy. Like, not to get like emo, but I think that's my happiest space. It's just
100%.
where I can feel safe, where I can be myself and not have to perform in any capacity or produce in any capacity. So just wherever I can take my little almohadita con mis perritos.
I love
Y mi
that.
amorcito.
Y mi amorcito, claro.
I love that.
Yeah,
I
that's
love
home
that.
for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ana Sheila.
I think it's home is kind of what I picture around me is I am in community. I feel very comfortable when there's a lot of community and I feel like we're doing something together. That feels like home and that can be anywhere. My culture around me. And I think that, my background, my Mexican culture does feel really like a big source of sense of home. And I think lastly, when I'm more connected to self, right? And I've realized like I was in a therapy session a little while ago, and I realized that there's been a lot of uncertainty in my life recently, and I realized that I was feeling a little disconnected from my body, and just remembering that my body, especially for us that travel a lot, that lived in a lot of different places I have, where there's a space particularly doesn't always feel like home, is like we have to be able to find home in ourselves and in our body, and just realizing what a source of wisdom and home my body is, and that it's so important for me, especially to find ways to stay really connected to my body. So my therapist was leading me in this beautiful, breathing, all these things. And I felt like a sense of home that I hadn't felt in a long time. So I was just reminded of the wisdom and home that there is in the body. So what can I do to stay connected to that? So that's something that I've been reflecting on, whether it's through dance. So I think the way that I feel like you're very connected and connected to your body is something that's like an inspiration to me, because I see what a source of home it is. But sometimes I'm so in here, and I've been so driven by my head for so long that it's only recently that I've been connecting with the source of wisdom that is the body, I think it's way wiser actually than my mind is. And so
Yeah.
I'll stop there.
No, it's so funny because I was going to say that. So what a perfect segue. I mean, for me, I think it's anywhere I can dance salsa.
Yeah.
I love salsa, but I mean, more than anything, the dance floor, anywhere where I can just feel like I can dance. And funny enough, I mean, I talk about this here a lot at the podcast, but there's an antro, a club, bar in Mexico that's been super like my place to go. Like I'm a regular now. And they recently had a 40th year anniversary, and they had like a red carpet, and they were like, oh, for artists, activists, and celebrities. And they gave me a personal invitation to walk the red carpet. And I like broke down because I was like, I'm not from here.
Yeah.
But you have asked me to be in community because you see me as such. And that was a beautiful moment. So to me, it's the dance floor. And what I'm learning recently, it's so hard when I've had to be the parent of a lot of people and even my own self to allow others to parent me or to care for me. So I'm learning that home is where I can accept love.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, if I can, sometimes nalgona is fun, right? Me conocen como nalgona, and folks are like, oh my God, you're still amazing. And I'm like, yes. But the people who know me as the messy person that I am, and like borderline kind of hoarder, because I'm an extension and product of my parents, like if you can love me past my mess, that's home.
That's home. What a beautiful reflection to end with.
I'm like thinking of a few people who love me and on my spaces, and I'm like, I feel like I need to go text everybody after this.
Oh, we love you.
But
Joanna, we want to thank you
life-changing.
so much for sharing so vulnerably with us and doing a little
Thank you so much.
kiki. Would love if you wanted to share anything, last words with our audience, any, where people can find you, what projects you're working on, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I'm always working on a million things in my mind, but they have to be done in the outside world. But you can always find me on Instagram at the Unapologetic Street Series or Johanna Rain. You can always find me there, sharing my many thoughts and excursions.
Excursions.
But yeah.
I love it. Well, thank you, Paletitas, for joining us on another episode. We want to hear from you all, so please feel free to let us know what home is to you all, where you're listening to us from. Leave it in the comments. Make sure you subscribe at Las Paleteras Podcast, everywhere you stream your podcast. And thank you so much for joining us on another episode. Y pues ya saben cómo terminamos cada episodio. Recuerden que la vida es más sabrosa con nosotras porque somos
Las Paleteras.
Hi, Paletitas. This podcast is produced by Joel and Elpidio Perez, along with your hosts. Las Paleteras is edited by Augusto Martinez, with music by Cintia Morado and Ingrid Guijarro. Special thanks to our friends at Mitu and Sonoro for production support.